I had just pulled up to my quiet cabin by the lake. I was ready for peace, ready for fresh air, ready for home. But instead, flashing police lights lit up the water. A woman stood in my driveway, yelling at the top of her lungs. Her finger pointed right at me, her voice cracked with rage. She screamed to the officers, "That's my cabin now. Arrest him." And in that moment, I realized this wasn't going to be a normal day by the lake. This was going to be a showdown that could cost me everything. Hello everyone, and welcome back to HOA Max Stories. My name is John. I'm just a regular guy from Michigan. I work hard all week, and this lakeside cabin is where I come to breathe, to relax, to live my life in peace. But as you're about to see, when you live under an HOA, peace doesn't always last long. Before we dive into this story, let me ask you something. If you've ever had your own run-ins with a nosy HOA neighbor, hit that subscribe button, because I promise you, you'll feel right at home here. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love knowing if you're tuning in from right here in the States, or maybe from somewhere else around the world. Now, let's get into it. I stood there, in front of my own lakeside cabin. And for a moment, I could not even breathe. The blue and red lights from the police cars danced across the water. My little piece of heaven didn't look like home anymore. It looked like a crime scene. And there she was. Karen, the loudest, most stubborn woman I had ever seen. Her arms waving in the air, her voice cracking, her face red as fire. She kept shouting, "He doesn't belong here. This is my cabin now." I wanted to laugh, because how could anyone in their right mind believe such a thing? But I couldn't laugh, because two police officers were standing just a few steps away. And they weren't smiling. I had dreamed of this moment for weeks. Driving back to the lake, finally taking time off from work. Unlocking that cabin door, and smelling the old wood again. Hearing the quiet splash of the water at night. Feeling the comfort of a place I had worked years to afford. But instead, my very first minutes back were filled with shouting, flashing lights, and a woman trying to erase me from my own property. I gripped my keys in my hands so tight. My knuckles turned white. I told myself, stay calm, stay calm. Because in that moment, one wrong word, one wrong move. And the police might not see me as the owner. They might see me as the problem. Karen pointed at me again, her eyes wide and furious. He abandoned this place. He left it. The HOA gave it to me. It's mine now. I froze. Did she just say the HOA gave it to her? I couldn't believe my ears. I looked at the officers, hoping they would shake their heads. Tell her to calm down. But they were listening. They were actually listening to her story. One of the neighbors whispered from across the road. People were standing there now, arms crossed, watching this like it was a movie. Only it wasn't a movie. It was my life. I tried to step forward. But Karen jumped in front of me like a guard dog. Her finger nearly touched my chest. "Don't you dare try to open that door," she hissed. "You're trespassing. And you're going to jail tonight." The officers raised their hands to separate us. They told us both to calm down. Karen kept yelling over them. But I could feel the eyes of the entire street on me. In that moment, I felt like a stranger on my own land. I spoke slowly, carefully. "Officers, this cabin belongs to me. I have the deed, the mortgage, all the documents. I've owned it for years. I came here today to enjoy my property, not to cause trouble." But before I could finish, Karen screamed again. "He's lying. He's making this all up. The HOA signed it over to me. I'm the rightful owner now." The officers looked from her to me. Their eyes serious. As if they didn't know who to believe. And for a second, my stomach dropped. Because what if they did believe her? What if paperwork wasn't enough? What if, in the eyes of the HOA, she had somehow twisted things around? My mind raced back through the months I had been away. Working long hours, living mostly in the city. Leaving this cabin locked and waiting. I thought I had been careful. Paid all my dues, kept the taxes updated. But HOAs have rules. Rules that are often hidden deep in pages nobody ever reads. Could Karen have found a loophole? Could she have convinced the board that I had abandoned the place? It sounded insane. But the way she shouted it, the way she believed it, made it feel almost real. The officers told us both to stand back. One of them asked me to hand over some proof. I nodded quickly, reached into my car, and pulled out the folder I had carried for exactly this reason. Inside were copies of the deed, tax receipts, bills with my name and address. I handed them over, my hands shaking, because I knew I had the truth. But truth doesn't always win right away. Not when someone like Karen is screaming in your ear. She kept pointing, yelling. He forged those. He's trying to scam you. Don't believe him. And for a moment, the entire street fell silent. Everyone waited to see what the officers would say. I looked at Karen. Her face red, her fists tight. And I wondered. Why? Why was she doing this? What made her believe she could steal my home? Was it greed? Was it power? Or was it just pure hatred for anyone who didn't follow her every HOA demand? And that's when I realized. This was not just about a cabin. This was about control. Karen wasn't fighting for property. She was fighting to prove she could bend the rules. To prove she could shout louder. To prove she could push anyone out of her way. And that thought scared me more than anything else. Because if she could try to take mine, what would stop her from doing the same to someone else? Now let me ask you, my friends. If you pulled into your home, your place of peace, and found someone screaming that it was theirs, how would you react? Would you shout back? Would you stand silent? Or would you let the law speak for you? Tell me in the comments. Because I really want to know. What would you have done if you were in my shoes that night? The officer held my papers in his hand. His eyes scanning from line to line. The silence heavy around us. Karen stood just a few feet away, her chest heaving, her hands shaking as she pointed at me again. Her voice cut through the night air. Don't let him fool you. He's a liar. This whole place belongs to me now. The officer cleared his throat, but before he could even speak, Karen lunged forward and shouted again. You're wasting your time reading those fake papers. He abandoned the cabin. He doesn't deserve it. Her words hit me like sharp stones. Abandoned? This was my cabin, my dream, my safe place, and she dared to call it abandoned? I wanted to shout back. I wanted to tell her exactly how hard I had worked for this place. How many nights I had sacrificed to pay for every wooden beam, every nail, every tax bill. But I kept my lips tight. I knew the moment I raised my voice, she would win. She wanted chaos. And I wasn't going to give it to her. The officer looked up from my paperwork and asked me slowly. Sir, how long have you owned this property? Almost 7 years, I replied firmly. My name is on the deed, the taxes are current, and I never signed anything over to her or to anyone else. The second officer leaned closer to Karen. Ma'am, he said, calm but stern. What proof do you have that this property belongs to you? Karen's eyes flickered for just a second. A crack in her armor. But she didn't back down. Instead, she waved her arms wildly. The HOA promised it to me. They said he was gone, he left it, he disappeared. I've been taking care of this neighborhood, I run the meetings, I keep everything in order. That gives me the right. The neighbors gasped softly. Even they seemed confused. Did Karen really believe HOA power gave her ownership of someone else's property? Or was she just acting for attention? The first officer took a step back, holding my documents firmly. "I see your name here," he said, pointing at the deed. "Sir, this looks official." Karen exploded. "No! No! You can't believe him. He's making this up. The HOA knows the truth, call them, they'll tell you." She was trembling, her face bright red. And for the first time I felt pity. But that pity quickly turned to anger when she spun toward me. Her finger nearly in my face again. Her voice shaking the still air of the lake. "You will never live here again. I'll make sure of it." The officers separated us once more. One of them told her to calm down or she could be charged for disorderly conduct. But Karen only grew louder. Her screams echoed across the water. And I could see more and more porch lights flick on as neighbors stepped outside. This wasn't private anymore. This was public humiliation. A trial in front of the whole neighborhood. Inside, I felt my blood boil. How dare she? How dare she stand on my property? Scream at the police? And try to erase years of my life with nothing but noise? I clenched my fists. But I kept my voice steady. "Officers," I said. "Please look again at those documents. They are real. They are legal. And they prove without a doubt that this cabin is mine." The first officer gave me a slow nod. But before he could speak again, Karen did something that shocked us all. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911 again. Right there in front of the two officers already on the scene. She screamed into the phone. "You're not listening. Send backup. This man is breaking into my cabin and nobody will help me." I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Neither could the neighbors. One woman gasped and muttered, "She's lost it." The officers exchanged a look. One of them gently reached for Karen's arm, telling her that calling 911 again for the same complaint could land her in serious legal trouble. But Karen yanked her arm away and shrieked louder. "This is mine. All of it. He doesn't belong here." At that moment, the night no longer felt safe. It felt dangerous. Because when someone is willing to lie, scream, and even break the law just to take what isn't theirs, you never know what they'll do next. The officer lowered his voice to me and said, "Stay calm, sir. Just let us handle this." So I stood there, silent, watching Karen unravel before my eyes. And deep down, a question burned inside me. Why me? Why this cabin? Why had she chosen me to fight against? Maybe it was because I had been gone for a while. An easy target. Maybe it was because she thought she could intimidate me into leaving. Or maybe she simply couldn't stand the idea of someone owning something she couldn't control. The officers finally asked Karen to step aside so they could verify my keys against the locks. I handed them over. One walked up the small porch, slid the key into the door. And with a soft click, the door opened. The neighbors murmured. The officer turned back and gave me a nod. "Sir," he said, "this is clearly your property." Karen screamed again, stomping her foot like a child denied candy. "No. This isn't fair. You don't understand." She threw her arms up, pacing back and forth, her voice echoing across the lake. But her words no longer had power. Not over the officers. Not over the neighbors. And not over me. I stood taller. I took a slow breath of the cool night air. And I looked right at Karen. Not with anger. Not with fear. But with a steady calm. Because in that moment, I realized something. Her power was only noise. And noise cannot steal a home. But let me ask you this. If someone stood in your driveway, screaming that your house, your land, your very home was theirs, and the whole neighborhood was watching, would you stay silent like I did? trusting the law to prove the truth? Or would you lose your patience and shout back until your voice drowned theirs out? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know, which one are you? The night air felt heavy. The sound of crickets along the lake had been drowned out by Karen's screams. The officers had already unlocked my cabin door with my key. They had confirmed it was mine. But Karen, she didn't stop. She marched up to the porch, her voice shrill, her arms flailing. You can't let him get away with this. He doesn't deserve it. The HOA rules are clear: if a property is left empty too long, it can be reassigned. The officers blocked her from stepping closer. One of them spoke firmly. Ma'am, we've seen the deed, the tax documents, the keys fit. This property belongs to him. That's the end of it. But Karen's face twisted with fury. She shook her head violently, her hair falling into her eyes, and screamed, "No! This isn't over. You don't know who you're dealing with." My chest pounded. Part of me wanted to shout back, to tell her that she was crazy, that she had no right. But instead I stood still, because I realized she wanted me to fight her. She wanted me to explode. That was her weapon, chaos. And I wasn't going to hand her that victory. The neighbors whispered among themselves, their eyes darting between me, the officers, and Karen. One older man muttered, "Typical Karen, always causing trouble." But this wasn't just trouble. This was an attack. She had called the police on me, tried to strip me of my home, and now she was threatening that it wasn't over. The officers warned her again. "Ma'am, if you don't calm down and leave this property, we may have to escort you away." But instead of backing down, Karen smirked. That smirk chilled me to the bone. Because it wasn't the smirk of someone who lost. It was the smirk of someone who was planning their next move. She turned to the crowd of neighbors and shouted, "You all know the rules. You've seen him gone for months. He abandoned this place. He doesn't care about this community, I do. I've been the one keeping things in order, cutting the grass around here, making sure people follow the rules. This cabin belongs to me now." Some neighbors looked uneasy. Others rolled their eyes. But I knew, words like that, repeated enough, can plant seeds of doubt. And Karen was a master at planting doubt. The officers cut her off. "Ma'am, this discussion is over. If you believe you have a legal claim, you'll need to take it to court. But tonight, you cannot harass this man on his property." For a brief second, I thought it was done. I thought Karen would storm off, slam her car door, and vanish into the night. But instead, she sat down, right there on my porch steps, like she owned the place. The officers told her to get up. She folded her arms. Her voice was cold, low, dangerous. "If you want me gone, you'll have to drag me out. This is mine. And I'm not leaving." The crowd gasped. I felt my throat tighten. Because suddenly, this wasn't just a shouting match anymore. This was a standoff. The officers radioed for backup. Another unit was on its way. Karen sat there like stone, rocking slightly, muttering under her breath, "Mine, it's mine, it's mine." I stepped back, my hands trembling. This wasn't normal behavior. This wasn't just an HOA argument anymore. This was obsession. And obsession can be dangerous. The second officer leaned closer to me, speaking softly. "Sir, don't engage. Just stay calm. We'll handle her." But staying calm wasn't easy. Because this was my porch, my steps, my cabin. And she was sitting there, defying everyone, daring anyone to move her. The backup arrived. 2 more officers stepped out, their presence adding weight to the already tense scene. They approached Karen, speaking firmly. "Ma'am, you need to leave this property immediately. If you refuse, we'll have no choice but to remove you by force." Karen's head snapped up. Her eyes burned with fury. But then, she smiled again. That awful, chilling smile. "Go ahead," she whispered. "But this cabin will never be his again. I'll make sure of it." That sentence. It sank into me deeper than all her shouting. Because it wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. Even if the officers took her away that night, she wasn't finished. She would come back. She would find another way. The officers finally pulled her to her feet. She kicked, screamed, cursed, her voice echoing through the night. "This is mine. It's mine. You'll regret this." Neighbors shook their heads, some muttering prayers, others shaking with disbelief. I stood frozen, my fists clenched at my sides. This wasn't the victory it should have been. Because deep down, I knew the war wasn't over. The officers led Karen away, their hands tight on her arms as she kept fighting. Her voice faded into the distance, but her words stayed lodged in my mind. "You'll regret this, it's mine." The neighbors slowly drifted back to their homes. The flashing lights died down. Silence returned to the lake. But it wasn't peaceful silence. It was heavy. Tense. The kind of silence where you know the story isn't finished yet. I stepped up onto my porch. The wooden boards creaked under my weight. The officer handed back my keys. I slid the key into the door, turned it slowly, and stepped inside. The familiar smell of wood and dust filled my lungs. I should have felt relief. I should have felt joy. But instead, I felt eyes on me. Like Karen's shadow still lingered in every corner. I walked through the cabin slowly, my hand brushing the old wooden table, the chair by the window, the stone fireplace I had built with my father years ago. Memories flooded in. But they didn't feel safe anymore. Because now, I knew someone out there wanted to take it all away. And that thought, that fear, lingered stronger than anything else that night. So let me ask you this, friends. If someone sat on your porch, refusing to leave, screaming that your home was theirs, would you have stood back like I did, letting the officers drag them away? Or would you have taken matters into your own hands, risking everything to defend what was rightfully yours? Tell me honestly in the comments. Because I wonder, how far would you go to protect your home? The cabin was quiet that night. But it was not the kind of quiet that brings peace. It was the kind of quiet where every creak in the floorboards, every rustle of the trees outside, felt like a warning. I sat in my chair by the window, looking out at the still water of the lake. But my mind was not calm. All I could hear was her voice echoing in my head. "You'll regret this, it's mine." The officers had dragged Karen away. The neighbors had gone back to their homes. But her shadow remained. Like she had left a piece of herself behind on my porch. I should have felt safe. The law had spoken, the documents were clear. I had my home back. But instead, I felt hunted. Around midnight, I heard a sound outside. At first, I thought it was just the wind. But then it came again, sharper, closer. I froze. The sound of footsteps on gravel. I slowly stood up, my heart pounding. I turned off the lamp so the cabin went dark. From the window, I peered out. And there she was. Karen. She was back. Her hair was messy, her face pale in the moonlight. And she was pacing up and down the driveway like a predator. She kept pointing at the cabin, muttering words I couldn't hear. Her arms moved wildly. Her shadow stretched long across the ground. For a moment, I wondered if she was talking to herself. Or to me. Or maybe even to the lake itself. Fear shot through me. If she was bold enough to return the same night, after the police had warned her, what else was she willing to do? I considered calling 911 again. But then I thought, what if they didn't take it seriously this time? What if they thought it was just a neighborly dispute? And even if they came, would that stop her forever? I stepped back from the window, my chest rising and falling fast. I tried to calm my breathing, but the sound of her muttering outside grew louder. Then came the scratching. A sharp, dragging sound against the side of the cabin wall, like nails across wood. My blood ran cold. I wanted to shout at her, to swing the door open and tell her to leave me alone. But something inside told me not to. Because with Karen, words only fueled her fire. So I stayed still, listening as she scratched the walls, paced the porch, and whispered her madness into the night. Finally, after what felt like hours, the sound faded. The footsteps grew softer, and she was gone. The next morning, the sunlight finally broke through the window. For the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe again. But when I stepped outside, my heart sank. Across the front of my porch, carved deep into the wood with something sharp, were the words, "Mine." I staggered back. My knees felt weak. I ran my hand over the letters, the cuts fresh and splintered. Her claim carved right into my home. The neighbors who walked by that morning stopped and stared. Some shook their heads, some muttered under their breath. But none of them looked surprised. Because this was Karen. This was who she was. And now, her fight was carved into my cabin like a scar. I called the police again. They came, they took photos, they made notes. But the officer's voice was tired as he said, "Sir, unless we catch her in the act, it's just property damage. We'll file a report." Just property damage. As if those carved letters weren't a threat. As if they weren't a promise that she wasn't going away. That day, I tried to go about normal life. I cleaned the cabin, fixed up the porch. But everything felt different. Every sound outside made me jump. Every car that passed by made me wonder if it was her. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Because people like Karen don't stop. They don't walk away. They wait. They plan. They come back. That night, I sat by the fireplace, the flames crackling low, and I thought about my options. Should I put up cameras? Should I hire security? Should I sell the cabin and walk away? The thought of selling made my stomach turn. This place wasn't just property. It was my life, my history, my memories. And if I gave it up because of her, then she would win. And I couldn't let that happen. But I also couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was out there, watching, waiting for her chance. Because when someone screams, "It's mine now," and carves it into your home, they don't just forget. They come back. That night, before I locked the door, I stood on the porch and looked out at the lake. The moon was high, the water still. But the peace felt fragile, like glass that could shatter at any second. And I asked myself, how long could I hold on to peace? With someone like Karen fighting to destroy it? So let me ask you, my friends, if someone vandalized your home, scratched their claim into your walls, and kept coming back even after the police dragged them away, would you stand and fight for your home? No matter how exhausting the battle became? Or would you give it up, just to finally have peace again? Tell me in the comments. Because I wonder, what kind of person are you when your home is under attack? The next few days felt like walking on thin glass. I tried to enjoy my cabin, tried to sit by the lake with a cup of coffee. But nothing felt the same anymore. Every time I heard a car engine in the distance, I thought it was her. Every time a knock echoed from the door, my chest tightened. And then, it happened. A letter slipped into my mailbox, stamped with the logo of the HOA. My stomach sank the moment I saw it. I tore it open, my hands shaking. Inside was a notice. Not a friendly one, but an official complaint. It said I had failed to maintain my property while away. It said my cabin was a risk to the community. It said if violations were not corrected, the HOA could take further action, including reassignment of the property. My eyes burned as I read the final line. This matter has been raised by board member Karen Miller. I slammed the letter down on the table. So this was her plan. She wasn't just going to scream in my driveway. She was going to use the HOA against me. She was going to twist the rules until they broke. I stormed outside, letter in hand. The sun was setting, neighbors were out walking their dogs. And I could feel their eyes on me. Because everyone knew who had sent that complaint. I spent the whole night gathering proof. Receipts of repairs I had done before leaving. Photos of the cabin looking clean and solid. Tax bills paid on time. Water and power kept active. She could lie with her mouth, but she couldn't erase the paper trail of truth. The next evening, I walked into the HOA meeting. The little community hall was packed tight with neighbors. Some curious, some whispering, some glaring. And at the front table sat Karen. Her arms crossed. Her lips curled into that smug little smile. The meeting began with small issues. A neighbor's fence too high. Another's shed built without permission. But I could barely hear any of it. My heart pounded in my chest, waiting for my name to come up. And then, it did. Karen leaned forward, her voice ringing clear across the room. "We have a serious matter tonight," she said. "This lakeside cabin has been abandoned for months. It's neglected, unsafe, a blight on our community. And according to HOA policy, it should be reassigned to someone who will actually care for it." Gasps rippled through the room. Some nodded along with her words. Others looked shocked. I gripped the folder in my hand tighter. Because this was it. My home, my history, my peace was on trial. The chair of the HOA board asked if I wanted to respond. I stood up slowly, the room quieting as I did. "Abandoned?" I said, my voice steady but sharp. "This cabin is not abandoned. I've paid every tax, every bill, every fee. I have proof of maintenance, repairs, and care. This cabin is mine legally and rightfully mine." I opened my folder and laid out papers. One by one, for all to see. Receipts. Photos. Bills. Everything. Karen slammed her hand on the table. "He's lying. He left it to rot. I've been the one watching the property. I've been the one keeping this community safe. And I will not allow him to just waltz back in like nothing happened." Her voice cracked with rage. Her eyes darted around, trying to pull the crowd to her side. The room turned into whispers. Some people looked at me with pity. Others looked at Karen with doubt. The chair leaned forward. "Karen, do you have any evidence to support your claim?" Her face tightened. She stuttered for a moment, then snapped. "I don't need evidence. Everyone here knows I've been right all along." That was the moment the tide shifted. Because everyone in that room, they could see the difference. I had papers. I had proof. I had calm in my voice. And Karen, she only had noise. One board member spoke quietly. "I've seen his property. It's not abandoned. The taxes are current. I don't think we can support this complaint." Another nodded. More murmurs filled the room. Karen's face burned red, her fists clenching as her control slipped. Finally, the chair cleared his throat. Based on the documents presented, this cabin belongs to its legal owner. The complaint is dismissed. Relief washed over me. But it didn't last long. Because Karen shot up from her chair, pointed straight at me, and screamed, "This isn't the end. You'll regret this. If I can't have that cabin, nobody will." The crowd gasped. The chair demanded order. But Karen stormed out of the hall, her voice still echoing as the door slammed shut. The meeting carried on. But nobody was listening anymore. Because everyone knew. The real story was the battle between me and her. I drove back to the cabin that night, my hands shaking on the wheel. The headlights lit up the familiar wooden trees. But it didn't feel safe anymore. Because I knew, if Karen couldn't take my home through lies and paperwork, she might try something far worse. I locked the door, checked the windows twice, and sat in silence, waiting for the next move. Because with people like Karen, there's always a next move. So let me ask you this, friends. If your neighbor used the HOA board to try and strip you of your home, slandered your name in front of the whole community, and then stormed out screaming threats, would you stay and fight every single battle, no matter how long it dragged on? Or would you walk away, just to escape the madness? Tell me honestly in the comments. Because I wonder, how far would you go when it's you against the HOA? The night after the HOA meeting was the hardest night of all. I sat in my cabin, the papers still spread across the table. But I couldn't focus on them anymore. Karen's words haunted me. If I can't have that cabin, nobody will. It wasn't just anger. It wasn't just jealousy. It was a threat. And I knew she meant it. Around midnight, the sound of tires on gravel pulled me from my chair. Headlights swept across the trees, bright against the windows. I crouched low, peeking through the blinds. It wasn't a police car. It wasn't a neighbor. It was Karen. She stepped out of her car, slamming the door, her voice rising before she even reached the porch. "You think you've won?" she screamed into the night. "You think the board saved you? This isn't over. Not by a long shot." I locked the door, my heart pounding. I could hear her pacing outside, her heels clicking against the wood. Then came the pounding on the door. Hard, angry, relentless. "Open up. Face me like a man. You don't deserve this place. I'll burn it down before I let you keep it." The words cut through me like ice. I grabbed my phone, ready to dial 911 again. But then, silence. I froze. Had she left? I crept to the window, peering out into the shadows. At first, I saw nothing. But then, a flicker. On the far side of the porch, near the wooden railing, a small orange flame danced in the dark. My chest tightened. She was trying to set my cabin on fire. I burst through the door, shouting, "Stop! What the hell are you doing?" Karen spun around, a lighter in her hand. Her face wild, her eyes crazed. For a moment, she looked almost unrecognizable. Like a stranger wearing the mask of someone I once knew. The flame flickered dangerously close to the wood. I rushed forward, grabbing the nearest bucket of water, and threw it across the porch. The fire hissed out, smoke rising into the cold night air. The officers arrived minutes later. Sirens flashing, lights bouncing off the lake. Karen stood there screaming, pointing at me again as if I were the one to blame. "He attacked me. He tried to hurt me. He's dangerous." But the evidence was clear. The lighter. The scorched wood. The water dripping across the porch. This time, the officers didn't just warn her. They put her in cuffs. She screamed the whole time they dragged her to the car. "You'll regret this. This cabin is cursed. You won't sleep another night here." Her voice echoed long after the car pulled away. When the officers left, I sat alone on my porch, the smell of smoke still hanging heavy in the air. The cabin I had loved for so many years suddenly felt fragile, like it could crumble under the weight of one person's hatred. The next day, I walked around the property, checking every corner, every tree line, every shadow, and everywhere I looked, I felt like she was there, watching, waiting. The carved word on the porch still stared back at me. Mine. Now scarred with blackened edges from the flame. Neighbors stopped by, some offering sympathy, some telling me to stay strong, others whispering that maybe it was time to sell. But I shook my head. This was my cabin. I wouldn't let her win. Still, the fear lingered. Every night, I locked the doors twice, closed every window, and slept with one eye open. I knew Karen was gone for now, but her words haunted me more than her presence. Because people like her, they don't forget. They don't let go. They wait. They plot. Weeks passed. The lake grew colder as fall set in. Leaves turned red and gold, floating on the water like fragile little rafts. Life almost began to feel normal again. Almost. Until one morning, I found another note on my porch, written in messy, jagged letters, on torn paper. "You don't belong here. Leave before it's too late." I held that note in my hand, my stomach twisting. The police had taken her away. She was supposed to be gone. But clearly, she wasn't finished. The fear turned into anger, boiling inside me. Because this wasn't just harassment anymore. This was war. I sat at the old wooden table in my cabin, the note crumpled in my fist, the carved word mine staring at me from the porch outside. And I asked myself, how much longer could I live like this? How much longer could I fight off her obsession? Before something finally broke? Because when someone is willing to call the police, sit on your porch, vandalize your home, and even light a flame against your walls, you start to wonder, what's next? So let me ask you, my friends, if someone tried to burn your house down out of spite, if they carved their claim into your walls, and left threats on your doorstep, would you stand your ground no matter the danger? Or would you walk away, choosing peace over pride? Tell me honestly in the comments. Because I wonder, is a home worth more than your safety? The morning after finding that note, I sat on my porch with a cup of cold coffee in my hands. But the coffee wasn't what kept me awake. It was the words scrawled across that torn paper. Leave before it's too late. I read them again and again. My jaw tight, my fists clenched, my eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of her. The silence of the lake felt heavier than ever. And in that silence, I knew one thing. Karen wasn't finished. Not until she made her last move. That night, I stayed awake. No lights on. No sound. Just me sitting in the dark with the cabin locked tight. The hours dragged on. And then, close to midnight, I heard it. The crunch of footsteps on gravel. Slow, steady, closer. My heart hammered in my chest. I rose to my feet, peeking through the blinds. And there she was. Karen. Her face pale in the moonlight. Her eyes wild. Her hands gripping something shiny. At first, I thought it was a flashlight. But then the beam shifted. And I saw the glint of metal. A crowbar. She crept toward the cabin door. her breath visible in the cold night air. I could see her lips moving, muttering words I couldn't quite hear. But I didn't need to hear them. I already knew what they said. "It's mine, it's mine, it's mine." The wood creaked as she raised the crowbar. The first slam rattled the door. The second nearly cracked the frame. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My voice low and urgent. "There's a woman trying to break into my home. Please send someone now." The operator told me to stay calm. To stay inside. But staying calm felt impossible, with every strike of that crowbar shaking the cabin. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I shouted through the door. "Karen! Stop this! The police are on their way!" For a moment, the banging stopped. The silence was louder than the noise. And then, her laughter. A high, broken laugh that sent chills down my spine. "You think they'll save you?" she yelled. "No one will save you. This place is mine." The crowbar slammed again. The wood split. My safe haven, breaking piece by piece under her madness. The minutes stretched like hours. I pressed my back against the door, holding it with everything I had, as if my weight alone could keep her out. And then, flashing lights, sirens, the sound of tires grinding on gravel. The cavalry had arrived. Karen froze, her shadow caught in the red and blue lights. Officers rushed forward, their voices sharp, commanding. "Drop the weapon. Step away from the door." But Karen didn't drop it. She screamed, her voice raw, her arms shaking as she lifted the crowbar again. "This is mine. He doesn't deserve it." The officers closed in, hands reaching for her arms. She swung wildly, but the crowbar clattered to the ground as they forced her down. Her screams echoed across the lake as they cuffed her. Her voice cracked, spitting rage, spitting hatred. "You'll regret this. It will never be yours." I stood inside, my back still pressed against the door, my chest heaving. The wood was split, the lock nearly torn off. But the cabin had held. And so had I. The officers took Karen away for the last time. This time, it wasn't just trespassing. It wasn't just harassment. It was attempted break-in, threats, vandalism. And this time, I knew she wouldn't be coming back anytime soon. When the noise faded and the night returned to silence, I opened the door slowly. The cool air hit my face. And for the first time in weeks, the silence felt different. Not heavy, not dangerous, but peaceful. The kind of peace I had almost forgotten. I sat on the porch steps, looking out at the still water of the lake. And I let out a long, shaky breath. This was my home. My cabin. My fight. And though Karen had tried everything to take it from me, she had failed. The next morning, the sun rose golden over the trees. Birds sang. Water rippled. And for the first time, the cabin felt like mine again. But deep inside, I knew the scars would remain. The carved word on the porch, the split door, the memory of nights filled with shouting and fear. They were reminders that sometimes the greatest battles in life aren't fought in courts or meetings, but in the places we call home. And as I stood there, coffee in hand, watching the lake shimmer under the morning sun, I realized something important. Karen didn't just want my cabin. She wanted control. She wanted power. But power built on lies always crumbles. And truth? Truth always holds. So let me ask you, friends, if someone tried everything to take away the home you love, If they screamed, lied, vandalized, and even tried to break down your door with a weapon, would you fight to the very end? No matter how many battles it took? Or would you walk away, choosing peace but losing everything you built? Tell me in the comments. Because I really want to know, what does home mean to you?